Shadows of Meridian. Part 1. The Finder. Eliza Morgan had a gift for finding lost things, which was fortunate, since she had a habit of losing herself. Tonight, she stood in the rain outside the Meridian Museum of Antiquities, watching the last of the cleaning staff exit through the employee entrance. The digital display on her ancient Casio read 11:47 p.m. Perfect timing. The museum would be empty now except for the night guards, two retirees who spent most of their shift in the security office watching late-night television. She pulled her hood tighter against the October drizzle and thought about the absurdity of her situation. How many people broke into museums in the middle of the night? Most thieves had the decency to take things out. But Eliza wasn't a thief. She was a finder, and something inside was calling to her. The sensation had started that morning, a faint, persistent tugging behind her sternum, like an invisible string connected to her heart. After years of following these pulls, she'd learned to trust them implicitly. Something lost wanted to be found, and somehow, she was the one designated to do the finding. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. The caller ID read Theo. "Please tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing," said the voice on the other end. "Define what you think I'm doing," Eliza replied, creeping along the museum's stone exterior toward a maintenance door she'd scouted earlier. Theo sighed, a sound Eliza had become intimately familiar with over their 5-year friendship. Breaking into the museum that just received the Caraway collection. The same collection rumored to contain several cursed artifacts from the pre-colonial era. "I'm not breaking in," Eliza said, pulling a small leather pouch from her jacket pocket. Breaking implies force. "I'm visiting after hours." The museum closed at 6 p.m. Hence, after hours. "Eliza, I'm just going to take a look," she insisted, kneeling before the maintenance door. From her pouch, she extracted a small vial of powder, ground moonstone, salt, and herbs, and sprinkled it along the door's threshold. "Something's in there, Theo. Something that doesn't belong. I can feel it. And this feeling justifies felony breaking and entering. I told you, I'm not breaking anything." She placed her palm flat against the door and whispered words that weren't quite English, weren't quite anything human. The powder glowed softly, then seeped into the crack beneath the door. There was a faint click. "See? The door wants to let me in." "That's not how doors work," Theo groaned. "Look, at least tell me you're wearing the amulet I gave you." Eliza's free hand went to the small silver pendant hanging around her neck, a spiral inscribed with tiny runes. "Of course. I'm not an amateur. Could have fooled me. Just be careful, okay? Don't touch anything weird." "Define weird." "Goodbye, Eliza." The line went dead. Slipping her phone back into her pocket, Eliza gently pushed the door open and stepped into the darkness of the museum's maintenance corridor. The tugging sensation intensified immediately, pulling her forward like an eager child. Eliza had discovered her gift at 8 years old, when she'd led her frantic parents straight to her missing baby brother, who had somehow crawled into an old steamer trunk in the attic, a place no one had thought to check. By 12, she was finding lost pets for the neighborhood kids. By 16, she was locating missing persons for desperate families when the police had given up. Now, at 27, she had refined her talent into something more. She didn't just find things, she restored them to where they belonged. And increasingly, that meant dealing with objects that weren't entirely natural. The corridor opened into the museum's main hall, where glass cases gleamed in the dim emergency lighting. Eliza paused, orienting herself toward the pull. It was coming from the East Wing, the new exhibition. As she slipped between display cases, she couldn't help admiring the artifacts around her. Ancient pottery from Mesopotamia, bronze figurines from China's Zhou dynasty, a collection of ceremonial masks from various indigenous cultures. Each item hummed with its own history, its own story, but none of them were calling to her. The Caraway collection occupied a special gallery at the far end of the East Wing. A velvet rope and a sign announcing, "Opening tomorrow," blocked the entrance. Eliza stepped over it without hesitation. Inside, the artifacts were arranged in glass cases according to region and time period. Most were typical archaeological finds: tools, jewelry, pottery. But Eliza's attention was immediately drawn to a display in the center of the room. It was a small stone tablet, no larger than a paperback book, covered in carvings that seemed to shift subtly in the dim light. The placard beside it read, "Ritual tablet, unknown origin, circa 1200 CE. This was it, the source of the pulling. Eliza approached slowly, her heart pounding. The closer she got, the more uncomfortable the sensation became. No longer a gentle tug, but an insistent, almost painful yanking. Something was wrong with this tablet. It didn't belong here. She knelt before the display case, studying the carvings. They weren't like any language she recognized, yet somehow they seemed almost readable, as if they might make sense if she just looked at them the right way. "You shouldn't be here," said a voice behind her. Eliza jumped, nearly knocking her head against the display case. She spun around to face a tall figure standing in the gallery entrance. It wasn't a security guard. The man, if man was the right word, wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light around it. His features were sharp, almost predatory, and his eyes. His eyes were the color of tarnished silver, with vertical pupils like a cat's. "Neither should this," Eliza replied, gesturing to the tablet and trying to keep her voice steady. She knew what he was immediately. The unnaturally perfect posture, the slight shimmer around his edges, visible only if you knew to look for it. Fae, and not the low-court kind that hung around parks trying to steal children's names. This was old nobility. The Fae tilted his head, studying her with open curiosity. "You can feel it then? Interesting. Most humans walk right past such things, their eyes sliding over what they cannot comprehend. I'm not most humans. Evidently." He took a step closer, moving with uncanny grace. "You're a finder." It wasn't a question, but Eliza nodded anyway. "Rare, in these times," he continued. "There was an age when every village had one. Now," he made a dismissive gesture, "humanity has forgotten much of what it once knew." "What is it?" Eliza asked, nodding toward the tablet. "And why is it calling to me?" The Fae's expression hardened. "It is a key, one that was never meant to be in your world. As for why it calls to you," he studied her face. "That is the more interesting question. A key to what? To a door that should remain locked." He stepped forward and extended a hand, long-fingered and pale as moonlight. "Give it to me." Eliza blinked. "I don't have it. It's still in the case." "But you came to take it." "I came to find it," she corrected. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it yet." The Fae's silver eyes narrowed. "You misunderstand your gift, finder. You are not meant to possess what you find, only to restore it to its proper place." "And is its proper place with you?" His lips curved into something approximating a smile, though it held no warmth. "Its proper place is nowhere in this realm, but I am tasked with its return." Eliza hesitated. Every instinct told her to be wary of anything the Fae said or offered. They were notoriously tricky, operating under rules and obligations that humans barely comprehended. But the pull toward the tablet was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, and she sensed truth in at least part of his words. The tablet didn't belong here. "How did it end up in a museum collection?" she asked. "Humans have a talent for unearthing things that should remain buried," the Fae replied. "The man you call Caraway found it during an expedition in northern Iceland, in a cave system that should have been inaccessible. He did not understand what he had found, only that it was old and would make an impressive addition to his collection." "And what happens if it stays here?" The Fae's expression grew solemn. "The key calls to what it unlocks. The longer it remains, the thinner the barriers become. Already there are seepages." As if on cue, the emergency lights flickered, and Eliza felt a cold draft where there should be none. She shivered, suddenly aware of shadows pooling in the corners of the room. Shadows that seemed deeper than they should be. "I don't suppose you can just take it," she said. The Fae shook his head. "There are rules. The key entered your realm through human hands. It must leave the same way." "Of course there are rules," Eliza muttered. "There are always rules." She turned back to the display case, considering her options. If she left the tablet here, whatever seepages the Fae mentioned would presumably continue. If she took it, she would be committing actual theft, not to mention potentially putting herself in debt to a creature she knew better than to trust. But the pulling in her chest had become almost unbearable, and now she recognized it for what it was. Not just the object calling to her, but the wrongness of its presence here. The tablet needed to go back where it belonged. "If I help you," she said carefully, "I want something in return." The Fae's eyebrows rose. "You understand our ways better than most. What would you ask?" "Information," Eliza replied. "I want to know more about what I am. About finders. How we came to be, and what the limits of this ability are." For a moment, the Fae was silent, contemplating her request. Then he nodded once sharply. "Agreed. I will tell you what I know of your kind. But first, the key." Eliza took a deep breath and placed her palms on the glass case. This would be the point of no return. She whispered the same words she'd used on the maintenance door, focusing her intent not on opening the case, but on making it understand it was protecting something that didn't belong. The glass grew warm beneath her hands, then seemed to soften, becoming almost fluid. Carefully, she reached through it, the surface tension resisting slightly, like pushing through honey, and grasped the stone tablet. The moment her fingers touched it, the pulling sensation vanished, replaced by a profound sense of wrongness. The tablet was cold, far colder than stone should be, and seemed to vibrate subtly against her skin. The carvings, which had appeared almost random before, now arranged themselves into patterns that hurt her eyes to look at directly. She withdrew her hand, pulling the tablet through the glass, which solidified behind it as if it had never been disturbed. "Very impressive," the Fae remarked. "You have had no formal training?" Eliza shook her head, staring at the tablet in her hands. "No one to train me. I've just figured things out as I went along." "A pity. Your kind once had traditions, methodologies." He held out his hand again. "The key, if you please." But before Eliza could hand it over, a new sound cut through the quiet of the museum. Footsteps, approaching rapidly from the main hall. "The night guards," she whispered. "I thought they stayed in the security office." The Fae's expression didn't change. "Those are not your guards." The footsteps grew louder, accompanied now by a strange clicking sound, like too many joints moving at once. And beneath that a low, hungry growling. "What did you mean by seepages?" Eliza asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. "The key calls to what it unlocks," the Fae repeated grimly. "And what it unlocks has sent servants to claim it." Part 2, The Hunt. Eliza had exactly 3 seconds to process this information before the first creature rounded the corner into the gallery. It had the general shape of a human, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, but the proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long, its torso too short, and its movements had a jerky, insectal quality that made Eliza's skin crawl. Its face was the worst part. Features that might have once been human, stretched and distorted like a reflection in a funhouse mirror, with too many teeth crammed into a mouth that split its face nearly in half. Behind it came 2 more, similar but not identical, as if each had been imperfectly copied from a different human template. "What are they?" Eliza gasped, stumbling backward. "Collectors," the Fae replied, placing himself between Eliza and the creatures. "Servants of what waits beyond the door. They feed on anything that displaces itself between realms. Lost travelers, stray objects. Finders. They feed on, wait what?" Eliza clutched the tablet tighter. "Why didn't you mention this part earlier? Would you have helped if I had? I might have brought a weapon." The Fae gave her an appraising look. "What makes you think you didn't?" Before Eliza could ask what he meant, the first collector lunged forward with unnatural speed. The Fae met it halfway, moving with fluid grace that belied his formal attire. His hands, Eliza noticed with shock, had elongated into talon-like appendages that gleamed like polished silver in the dim light. The creature shrieked as those talons raked across its chest, leaving deep furrows that oozed a thick, tar-like substance. But it didn't fall. Instead, it grabbed the Fae's arm with both hands, revealing too many joints in its own fingers, and twisted with a strength that would have shattered human bone. The Fae hissed, the first sign of pain or effort he'd shown, and kicked the creature back. "The exit is behind you," he called to Eliza without taking his eyes off the collectors. "Run. Take the key to the river. I will find you there." "The river? Which river?" Eliza demanded, but she was already backing toward the emergency exit at the rear of the gallery. "Any river. Moving water disrupts their tracking." The Fae ducked under a swipe from the second collector, moving with inhuman speed. "Go now." Eliza didn't need to be told twice. She turned and sprinted for the exit, the stone tablet clutched tightly against her chest. Behind her, she heard screeches and crashes as the Fae engaged the creatures. She didn't look back. The emergency exit opened onto a narrow alley behind the museum. The rain had intensified, falling in sheets that turned the world into a blurry impressionist painting. Eliza pulled her hood up with her free hand and ran, her sneakers splashing through deepening puddles. She had entered the museum from the east side, near the small parking lot where she'd left her car. But heading there would mean circling around the building, potentially running into more of those things. Instead, she fled west, toward downtown Meridian, where the river cut through the city center. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Theo again. She fumbled it out with cold, wet fingers and answered without slowing down. "Little busy right now," she panted. "Eliza?" Theo's voice was tense. "What's happening?" The amulet's alarm just went off. Yeah, that tracks. She ducked down a narrow passage between two buildings, seeking a less exposed route. Got the artifact. Also got some company. Non-human company. The bad kind. Shit. Where are you? Running toward the river. Something about moving water, disrupting their tracking. Who told you that? A Fey Lord in a bespoke suit who may or may not be trustworthy, but is currently fighting off nightmare creatures to buy me time. So I'm choosing to believe him on this point. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then, the Meridian bridge. I'll meet you there in 15 minutes. Don't stop for anything. Wasn't planning to. Eliza began, but cut off as she emerged from the alleyway onto a main street and nearly collided with a figure standing directly in her path. It looked human, at first glance, a middle-aged man in a security guard's uniform. But as she stumbled back, she saw the too wide smile, the slightly wrong proportions, the way its eyes reflected the streetlights like an animal's. Not human. Collector. Eliza jerked the phone back to her ear. Make that 20 minutes. I need to take a detour. She hung up before Theo could respond. The collector tilted its head, studying her with unnatural stillness. When it spoke, its voice was like gravel being crushed. The key. Give. Sorry, not yours to take. Eliza backed away slowly, glancing around for an escape route. Belongs beyond. Return. It took a step toward her, movements too smooth, like it was gliding rather than walking. Yeah, that's the plan, actually. Just not with you as the courier. The creature's face contorted, the human facade slipping to reveal something twisted underneath. We'll take. We'll feed. It lunged. Eliza dove to the side, rolling across the wet sidewalk. The tablet came dangerously close to slipping from her grasp, and she clutched it tighter, ignoring the painful cold that seemed to seep from the stone into her bones. She scrambled to her feet and ran, not toward the river now, but down a side street lined with closed shops. Behind her, she heard the creature's uneven footsteps, moving faster than anything with that shape should be able to move. Think, Eliza. What did she have that could help her? The tablet itself was worse than useless. It was what they wanted. Her phone. Keys. The small pouch of herbs and minerals she used for finding work. And Theo's amulet. He had given it to her months ago, claiming it would keep the nasties away. She had accepted it mainly to humor him, though she'd noticed that her apartment had been remarkably roach-free since she started wearing it. Now she wondered if it was capable of more. She rounded a corner, spotted a recessed doorway, and ducked into it, pressing herself against the wall. The collector's footsteps slowed, then stopped altogether. She could hear it breathing, a wet, rasping sound, as it cast about for her trail. Pulling the amulet from beneath her shirt, Eliza examined it closely for the first time. The spiral design was intricate, with tiny symbols etched into the silver that she couldn't read. In the center was a small, cloudy crystal that seemed to pulse faintly with its own inner light. What had Theo said when he gave it to her? Something about it creating a blind spot in the supernatural perception. Not invisibility, but a kind of camouflage. The footsteps resumed, coming closer. Eliza pressed herself deeper into the doorway, clutching the amulet in one hand and the tablet in the other. She closed her eyes and focused on the sensation of being unseen, of blending into the background, of being just another shadow in a city full of shadows. The footsteps stopped directly in front of her hiding place. Eliza held her breath, counting the seconds in her head. 1, 2, 3. On 4, the footsteps moved on, continuing down the street. She waited until she could no longer hear them, before allowing herself to breathe again. That had been too close. The river was still several blocks away, and she couldn't count on the amulet to hide her if she moved. But staying put wasn't an option either. There were more of these things out there, and the Fey Lord had implied they could track the tablet. Or her. Or both. Eliza slipped out of the doorway and took off in the opposite direction from where the collector had gone, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. The rain was her ally now, obscuring visibility and washing away any scent trail she might be leaving. As she ran, she found herself examining the tablet more closely. The carvings seemed to be arranged in a spiral pattern, echoing the design of Theo's amulet. Coincidence? She doubted it. Theo knew more about the supernatural world than he let on, though he presented himself as merely an amateur occultist and part-time inventory manager at an organic grocery store. The tablet was still unnaturally cold, but she noticed something else now. It was humming, a subtle vibration that seemed to intensify as she moved west, toward the river, like it was responding to proximity to something. or like something was responding to proximity to it. The realization hit her just as she emerged onto River Street, the main thoroughfare that paralleled the Meridian River. The tablet wasn't just a key. It was a beacon, and the closer she got to where it belonged, the stronger the signal became, which meant the collectors would be drawn here too. As if summoned by the thought, she spotted movement ahead, a figure emerging from a side street, moving with that distinctive too-fluid gait. Another collector, this one wearing the form of a young woman in jogging clothes. Its head swiveled toward Eliza, eyes gleaming in the streetlights. Eliza froze. Behind her, she heard more footsteps. The security guard collector had doubled back, somehow sensing her direction. And from the corner of her eye, she spotted a third, descending a fire escape to her right. They had her surrounded. The Meridian Bridge was visible in the distance, its lights reflecting off the rain-slicked street. So close, yet impossibly far, with 3 collectors blocking her path. Her phone buzzed. Theo again. She didn't dare answer it. The collectors converged slowly, cautiously, as if afraid she might have some trick up her sleeve. Which gave Eliza an idea. Maybe she did. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her finding pouch. The herbs and minerals inside were meant for locating lost objects, for creating connections between seeker and sought. But perhaps with the right intent. The collectors were less than 20 feet away now, spreading out to cut off any escape routes. Eliza backed up against the railing that separated the sidewalk from the steep embankment down to the river. 40 feet below, black water churned, swollen from the rain. "The key," growled the security guard collector. "Give. You want it?" Eliza pulled a pinch of the mixture from her pouch. "Come and get it." She flung the powder into the air between them, focusing her intent not on finding, but on revealing, on making visible what was hidden. The powder hung suspended for a moment, then ignited, not with fire, but with a cold, blue-white light that illuminated the street like a flash of lightning. In that instant, Eliza saw the collectors as they truly were, not the human shapes they wore like ill-fitting clothes, but writhing masses of shadow and hunger, with too many limbs and too many eyes and mouths that opened into darkness deeper than the space between stars. The creatures recoiled, shrieking as the light stripped away their disguises. Their forms flickered, human facades failing to reassert themselves. Eliza didn't wait to see more. She vaulted over the railing and half jumped, half fell down the steep embankment toward the river, sliding through mud and loose gravel. The tablet was clutched against her chest like a lifeline, the cold of it numbing her fingers. Behind her, the shrieks turned to howls of rage. She heard them scrambling after her, their movements no longer attempting to mimic human limitations. The embankment was steeper than she'd anticipated, and halfway down, her foot caught on an exposed root. She pitched forward, tumbling the rest of the way down in a painful jumble of limbs and mud. The tablet flew from her grasp, landing with a splash at the river's edge. Eliza dragged herself to her hands and knees, spitting out mud and blinking rain from her eyes. The tablet lay just inches from the water, its carvings glowing with an eerie blue light that matched the color of her revealing powder. She lurched toward it, fingers closing around the stone, just as the first collector reached the bottom of the embankment. It no longer looked remotely human, just a twisted shadow given substance, all angles and hunger. With the last of her strength, Eliza hurled herself toward the river, the tablet still clutched in her hand. The cold water hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. The current immediately seized her, pulling her away from the bank and the reaching claws of the collectors. The last thing she saw before the river dragged her under was the 3 creatures pacing along the shore, their inhuman shapes silhouetted against the city lights, unwilling or unable to follow her into the rushing water. Then there was only darkness, cold, and the relentless pull of the current. Part 3. The door. Eliza didn't remember being pulled from the river. One moment she was fighting to keep her head above water, the tablet a freezing weight in her numb hand. The next, she was lying on her back on a wooden dock, coughing up river water while a familiar voice cursed steadily above her. Of all the reckless, idiotic stunts, this one takes the prize. Breaking into museums, stealing cursed artifacts, diving into rivers during flood season. "Nice to see you too, Theo," Eliza croaked, opening her eyes. Theo Blackwood knelt beside her, his angular face a mask of concern barely disguised as irritation. His dreadlocks were damp, suggesting he'd waded into the shallows to fish her out. He wore his usual outfit of black jeans and a vintage band t-shirt under an army surplus jacket, supplemented tonight with a variety of amulets and charms that clinked softly as he moved. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone softening slightly. You look like hell. Been there, nearly didn't come back. Eliza struggled to sit up, suddenly remembering. The tablet. Right here. Theo pointed to where the stone tablet lay on the dock beside them, still glowing faintly blue. Though I'm starting to wish I'd left it in the river. What is that thing? A key, Eliza said, remembering the Fae's words. To a door that should remain locked. She glanced around, taking in their surroundings for the first time. They were on a small private dock that extended into the river from what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. The lights of the Meridian bridge were visible about half a mile upstream. Where are we? My backup spot, Theo replied, helping her to her feet. For emergencies, which this definitely qualifies as. Those things that were chasing you? They're still looking. I can feel them searching. Eliza shivered, suddenly aware of how cold and wet she was. They're called collectors. They serve something on the other side of wherever this key leads. And you stole it from the museum. Why, exactly? Because it doesn't belong there, Eliza said simply. It was causing seepages, according to my Fae informant. Theo closed his eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. You've been talking to the Fae now? Just the one. Tall guy, silver eyes, turns his fingers into talons when he fights. Said he'd meet me at the river. Eliza looked around expectantly, but there was no sign of the elegant, predatory figure who had confronted her in the museum. Of course he did, Theo muttered. And you believed him because he was fighting those things to help me escape. And because the pull led me to the tablet, and everything he said about it feels true. She looked down at her hands, which were scratched and muddy, but already regaining feeling. I'm a finder, Theo. This is what I do. You find lost keys, missing cats, and runaway teenagers, Theo corrected. Not interdimensional artifacts that attract shadow monsters. Maybe those are just the jobs I've been taking, Eliza replied quietly. Maybe I've been playing it safe. Theo studied her face for a long moment, then sighed. You're serious about this? The Fae said there were others like me once. Finders in every village. That it was a tradition, with methods and training. She met his gaze. I need to know more. About what I am, what I can do. And you think he'll tell you? The Fae aren't exactly known for their straightforward honesty, Liz. He made a deal. Theo groaned. Even worse. Fae deals are binding, I know. But so is the pull, Theo. You don't understand what it's like, having something inside you constantly tugging you toward lost things that are out of place. It's like having a compass needle embedded in your chest, always pointing toward wrong and begging you to make it right. Theo was silent for a moment, his expression softening. Then he sighed again, this time in resignation. What's the plan then? We wait here for your Fae Lord to show up? We need to get the key back where it belongs, Eliza said. To close whatever door it's opened. And where exactly is that? Before Eliza could answer, a smooth voice spoke from the shadows of the warehouse. An excellent question. Theo whirled, pulling something from his jacket, a small, curved knife that gleamed silver in the dim light. Eliza merely turned, unsurprised. The Fae Lord stepped into the light, and Eliza had to suppress a gasp. He looked diminished somehow. His impeccable suit was torn in several places, revealing not skin beneath, but a substance like liquid moonlight that seemed to be both solid and fluid at once. His silver eyes were duller, and one arm hung limply at his side. You're hurt, she said. The collectors have teeth, he replied simply. Just the one. Tall guy, silver eyes, turns his fingers into talons when he fights. Said he'd meet me at the river. Eliza looked around expectantly, but there was no sign of the elegant, predatory figure who had confronted her in the museum. Of course he did, Theo muttered. And you believed him because he was fighting those things to help me escape. And because the pull led me to the tablet, and everything he said about it feels true. She looked down at her hands, which were scratched and muddy, but already regaining feeling. I'm a finder, Theo. This is what I do. You find lost keys, missing cats, and runaway teenagers, Theo corrected. Not interdimensional artifacts that attract shadow monsters. Maybe those are just the jobs I've been taking, Eliza replied quietly. Maybe I've been playing it safe. Intent is activation, Ash said. You took the key with the purpose of returning it to its proper place. That purpose, combined with the ritual cleansing of river water, has awakened its true nature. Now we must complete what you have begun. Which is what exactly? Theo demanded. Ash turned his silver gaze to the other man. The closing of a door that should never have been opened. The restoration of a boundary between your world and one that hungers for it. And the tablet is the key to this door, Eliza said. But you said it doesn't belong in our world at all. So where does it go back to? Not to my realm, if that is your concern, Ash replied. The key belongs to neither world, but exists between them. It must be returned to its threshold. And where is this threshold? Theo asked, still wary. Ash pointed upstream, toward the Meridian bridge, where the oldest human crossing meets the river. Borders within borders. Thresholds upon thresholds. Eliza frowned. The bridge isn't that old. It was built in the 1930s. The current incarnation, yes. But humans have been crossing the river at that exact point for thousands of years. First by ford, then by ferry, then by wooden bridges, and finally by the steel and concrete one that stands now. Ash's expression was solemn. Places remember, even when humans forget. So we take the tablet to the bridge, Eliza said slowly. Then what? Then you use your gift finder. You restore what is lost to where it belongs. Theo made a frustrated noise. That's rather vague for a supposedly high-stakes operation. The nature of such workings is that they must be intuited, not dictated, Ash replied. The finder's gift responds to necessity and truth. It cannot be forced or falsified. Convenient, Theo muttered. Eliza placed a hand on her friend's arm. It's okay, Theo. This is. It feels right. Like the pulling, but different. Like I know what to do once we get there. Theo studied her face, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, but we're doing this my way. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a handful of small cloth pouches, each tied with different colored strings. Protection charms. One for each of us. He handed one to Eliza, then hesitated before offering the third to Ash. The Fae accepted it with a small nod of acknowledgement. You have some skill, human. These are well crafted. Thanks, Theo said dryly. I took an online course. Despite the situation, Eliza found herself smiling. She slipped the charm into her pocket. We should get moving. Those collectors could find us any minute. Agreed, Ash said, glancing toward the river. We should stay close to the water. It will not stop them entirely, but it will slow them down. There's a maintenance path that runs along the embankment, Theo said, gesturing upstream. It'll take us all the way to the bridge. They set off, with Theo leading the way. Eliza carried the tablet, which seemed to grow colder and heavier with each step toward the bridge. Ash moved silently beside her, his injured arm still hanging limply, occasionally casting wary glances at the shadows around them. You promised me information, Eliza said after they had walked in silence for several minutes. About finders. What we are, where we came from. Ash's silver eyes flicked to her. So I did. What would you know first? Were we made or born this way? Both, in a sense, Ash replied. The gift has always existed in certain bloodlines, dormant until needed. In ancient times, it was more common, a necessary adaptation when the boundaries between worlds were less stable. As those boundaries strengthened and your kind built civilizations that turned away from the old knowledge, the gift became rarer, appearing only in times of necessity. So it's genetic? Eliza pressed. My parents don't have it. Neither does my brother. It does not always follow direct lineage. Sometimes it sleeps for generations before awakening. Ash stepped carefully over a fallen branch. But it is not merely inheritance. The gift must be recognized, acknowledged. Many who might have been finders never discover their potential because they are taught to ignore the pull, to dismiss it as imagination or coincidence. But I didn't ignore it, Eliza said. No, you followed it, even as a child. You trusted what you felt, despite having no context for understanding it. There was something like respect in Ash's voice. That is rare in this age. What else can finders do? Eliza asked. Besides, find things. The primary gift is location, the ability to sense objects, creatures, or places that are displaced from their proper context. But with training, many finders developed additional talents. Some could read the history of an object by touching it. Others could track individuals across vast distances. A few could even find pathways between realms, though that was the rarest skill of all. Eliza thought about the maintenance door at the museum, how she had spoken to it, how it had understood her intent. And the thing with doors? Making them open? Ah, Ash gave her a sidelong glance. You've discovered persuasion. Interesting. That is typically a secondary development, after years of practice. I've been doing it since I was a teenager, Eliza admitted. It just made sense. If I'm supposed to find things, I need to be able to reach them. Indeed, the gift adapts to necessity. and you have been finding things for a long time without guidance. He tilted his head, studying her. How many lost things have you restored, Finder? How many missing pieces returned to their homes? Eliza shrugged. Hundreds, I guess. Mostly small stuff. Keys, wallets, family heirlooms. Missing pets. Sometimes people. She frowned, remembering. About 5 years ago, there was a kid who disappeared from the playground at Westside Park. The police searched for 3 days, found nothing. The parents hired me as a last resort. I found him in an abandoned well 2 miles away. And how did you find him? The usual way. I got close to where he was last seen, then followed the pull. No, Ash said. Describe the sensation. The exact nature of the pull. Eliza was silent for a moment, trying to put into words something she had always experienced, but never fully articulated. It was cold. A cold tug right here. She touched the center of her chest, like a fishing hook made of ice, pulling me forward. And the closer I got, the colder it felt. A cold pull, Ash repeated softly. That is significant. Before Eliza could ask what he meant, Theo spoke from ahead of them. We've got company. They had reached a point where the maintenance path widened slightly, forming a small clearing beside the river. Standing in the center of the clearing was a figure Eliza recognized immediately. The security guard collector, now barely maintaining its human disguise. Parts of its face seemed to shift and flow, revealing glimpses of something dark and hungry beneath. Behind it stood 3 more, each wearing a different human form, each equally unstable. All 4 turned toward the approaching trio, their not quite human eyes fixing on the tablet in Eliza's hands. Key, the security guard collector hissed. Give. Yeah, we've established that's not happening, Eliza replied, stepping back. Theo moved in front of her, pulling another charm from his jacket. Can you get around them? He asked in a low voice. The bridge is only 1/4 mile ahead. Eliza glanced around. The path was blocked by the collectors, and on the other side was a steep embankment leading up to the street. They could try to double back, but that would only delay the inevitable. I don't think so. Then we fight, Ash said, flexing his good hand. The fingers elongated into silver talons, gleaming in the dim light. With what? Theo demanded. I've got some defensive charms and a silver knife. You're injured. And Eliza's. I'm what? Eliza asked, a hint of defiance in her voice. Theo had the grace to look embarrassed. Not a fighter. Neither were most finders, Ash said. Until they needed to be. He turned to Eliza. The tablet is responding to your intent. Use it. Eliza looked down at the stone in her hands. The carvings were glowing brighter now, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. What do you mean, use it? It's a key, not a weapon. It is both, Ash replied. Keys unlock. Keys reveal. Show these creatures what they truly are, and you strip them of power in this realm. The collectors were advancing slowly, spreading out to surround them. Theo pulled out his silver knife with one hand and one of his charm pouches with the other. Any time now, Liz, he muttered. Eliza closed her eyes, trying to focus. Show them what they truly are. Like what she had done with the finding powder, but stronger. The tablet was cold in her hands, vibrating with potential. Intent is activation, Ash had said. She focused her intent now, not on finding, not on opening, but on revealing. On stripping away disguises. On showing truth. The carvings on the tablet flared with sudden, blinding light. Eliza opened her eyes to see the symbols rising from the stone, becoming 3-dimensional patterns of light that hovered in the air around her. They were no longer meaningless etchings, but a language she somehow understood, a language of boundaries, of definitions, of fundamental reality. Without conscious thought, she selected 3 symbols and pushed them toward the advancing collectors, feeling as if she were physically forcing them through layers of resistance. The symbols struck the creatures and sank into them like hot knives into wax. The collectors froze, their human disguises falling away completely, revealing their true forms, twisted amalgamations of shadow and hunger, with limbs that bent at impossible angles and faces that were just empty voids. They can't maintain form in this realm without disguise, Ash said, his voice tight with pain or effort. Push harder. Eliza selected more symbols, forcing them toward the creatures with a mental shove that left her gasping. The collectors shuddered, their bodies seeming to lose cohesion, edges blurring like ink in water. But they didn't retreat. The security guard collector, now just a vaguely humanoid shadow, lunged forward with surprising speed. Theo met it with his silver knife, slashing across what might have been its chest. The creature recoiled, hissing, but 2 others darted around it, heading straight for Eliza. Ash intercepted one, his talons raking through its substance. The thing shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, but continued forward, wrapping elongated limbs around the Fae's injured arm. Ash snarled in pain, his form flickering momentarily to reveal something far less human beneath his elegant exterior. The 4th collector reached Eliza before she could react, its cold, insubstantial limbs grasping at the tablet. The touch of it was like plunging into ice water, stealing her breath and sending shockwaves of cold pain through her body. In desperation, she thrust the tablet forward, into the creature's formless center. The stone passed through it like a hot knife through butter, leaving a glowing wound in its wake. The collector shrieked and fell back, its form destabilizing further. "The bridge!" Ash shouted, struggling with his own opponent. "Go now." Eliza hesitated, unwilling to leave them behind. "We'll hold them off," Theo called, parrying a strike from the security guard collector. "You're the only one who can close the door. Go." With a final glance at her friend, Eliza turned and sprinted down the path toward the bridge, the tablet clutched tightly in her hands. Behind her, she heard shrieks and crashes as the battle continued, but she didn't look back. The path curved alongside the river, eventually leading to a set of stone steps that ascended to street level. Eliza took them 2 at a time, her lungs burning from the exertion. At the top, she emerged onto the approach to the Meridian bridge, a massive steel and concrete structure that spanned the churning river below. The bridge was empty at this late hour, the only illumination coming from evenly spaced streetlights that cast pools of yellow light on the wet pavement. Eliza ran toward the center, where the bridge arched highest over the water. As she reached the midpoint, she felt the pulling sensation change. No longer a tug forward, but a downward pressure, as if the tablet was trying to sink through the bridge itself. She stopped, panting, and looked around. "Now what?" she muttered. The tablet was glowing brighter than ever, the symbols hovering above its surface pulsing with an urgent rhythm. But there was no obvious door, no portal, no clear place to insert a key. Eliza closed her eyes, focusing on the sensation. The pull was strongest. There. She opened her eyes and looked down at a specific point on the bridge's surface, a seemingly ordinary patch of concrete. Kneeling, she placed her palm flat against the spot. It felt different, colder, somehow more insubstantial than the concrete around it. She pushed, and her hand sank into the solid surface, as if it were merely an illusion. "Found you," she whispered. Reaching deeper, her fingers encountered something that felt like a lock. Not physical, but a pattern of energy, a knot in the fabric of reality. She pulled the tablet closer, studying the glowing symbols above it. They had arranged themselves into a specific configuration, mirroring the pattern she felt beneath the bridge. Understanding dawned. The tablet wasn't a key to be inserted. It was a template, a guide for how to close the lock properly. Eliza took a deep breath and began to trace the pattern with her free hand, pushing the symbols from the tablet into the lock one by one. Each one slid into place with a sensation like a puzzle piece clicking home. As the last symbol slid into position, a shock wave rippled outward from the spot, momentarily distorting the air around her. The tablet in her hand grew unbearably cold, then shattered into a fine dust that sifted through her fingers. Beneath the bridge, something massive shifted. Eliza could feel it, a door closing, a barrier reforming, a boundary being restored. The sensation of wrongness that had been growing stronger since she first felt the pull in the museum suddenly vanished, replaced by a profound sense of rightness, of order restored. She sat back on her heels, oddly lightheaded. It was done. Whatever door the tablet had been opening was now firmly closed. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned, half expecting to see more collectors, but it was Theo and Ash, both looking battered but alive. "You did it," Theo said, kneeling beside her. "The collectors just fell apart, like someone cut their strings." "The door is closed," Ash confirmed, his silver eyes scanning the bridge with an appraising gaze. "Sealed more thoroughly than before, in fact. Your work, Finder, is impressive." Eliza looked down at her empty hands, still dusted with the remains of the tablet. "The key destroyed itself." "As it was meant to," Ash said. "It served its purpose and returned to its constituent elements. As all things do eventually." "So that's it?" Theo asked, helping Eliza to her feet. "Crisis averted, world saved, back to normal?" "For now," Ash replied. His form seemed more solid again, his injured arm healing visibly as they watched. "But there are other keys, other doors. The boundaries between worlds are not static, especially in these times. What do you mean, these times? Eliza asked. Ash gave her a long, considering look. Your world is changing. The old balances are shifting. Technology pushes against the edges of reality in ways not unlike ancient magics once did. New paths are forming. New threats emerging. He gestured toward the spot where the door had been. This was a minor incursion, easily contained. Others will not be. And you think I'm supposed to? What? Become some kind of interdimensional security guard? Eliza asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The pull had never felt so right, so purposeful, as it had when she was closing that door. I think you are a finder in a time when things are becoming lost between worlds with increasing frequency, Ash replied carefully. The gift awakens when it is needed. It has awakened in you more strongly than in any human I have encountered in centuries. Draw your own conclusions. Eliza turned to Theo, who was watching her with a mixture of concern and resignation. Don't look at me, he said. I'm just the guy with the charms and the silver knife. But, he sighed, if this is what you're meant to do, I've got your back. Somehow. Probably need to take more than an online course, though. Your friend has potential, Ash observed. The old practitioners often worked in pairs, a finder and a warden. One to locate, one to protect. A warden, Theo repeated. That actually sounds not terrible. Eliza looked between them, then out at the river flowing beneath the bridge. The pull was gone for now, but she knew it would return. It always did. And now she understood its purpose more clearly than ever before. I still have questions, she said to Ash. About finders, about the doors, about everything. And I still owe you answers, the Fae acknowledged. But perhaps not tonight. The door is closed. The immediate danger is past. And you humans require rest to function properly, as I understand it. Eliza found herself laughing, a release of tension she hadn't fully realized she was carrying. Yes, we do. Especially after nearly drowning and fighting shadow monsters. Then rest, Ash said. When you are ready to learn more, simply speak my name near moving water. I will hear. Just like that? Theo asked suspiciously. No tricks, no hidden costs? Our bargain was for information in exchange for the return of the key. The key has been returned. The information remains to be fully delivered. Ash's lips curved in a slight smile. I am bound by my word, Warden. I'm not a... Theo began, then stopped. You know what? Fine. Warden. Still sounds better than grocery store inventory manager. Ash turned back to Eliza, his expression becoming serious again. The cold pull you described earlier, Finder. It is significant because it indicates a particular affinity for finding things lost between worlds, rather than merely misplaced within your own. Few finders in history have possessed that specific talent. It suggests that your gift has awakened precisely for the challenges that lie ahead. Lucky me, Eliza murmured, though part of her, the part that had always felt like something was missing, like she was meant for more than finding lost keys and wallets, felt a thrill of excitement at his words. Indeed, Ash said, apparently missing or ignoring her sarcasm. We will speak again. With that, he stepped backward, his form seeming to dissolve into the shadows between the streetlights until he was gone. Theo stared at the empty space where the Fae had been. That's a neat trick, says the guy who apparently makes protective charms that actually work against interdimensional monsters, Eliza replied, nudging him with her elbow. Beginner's luck, Theo said with a shrug, though he looked pleased. Come on, let's get back to my place. You need dry clothes, food, and probably a very strong drink. Not necessarily in that order. As they walked off the bridge, Eliza cast one final glance back at the spot where the door had been. To ordinary eyes, it looked like any other patch of concrete. But she could feel the difference, a solidness, a rightness that hadn't been there before. She had done that. She had found something that was lost between worlds and put it back where it belonged. And somehow, she knew it was only the beginning. The pull would come again. And next time, she would be ready. Epilogue, The Waking. 3 weeks later, Eliza sat cross-legged on the floor of Theo's apartment, surrounded by books, scrolls, and printouts of obscure forums dedicated to the supernatural. Theo had thrown himself into research with an enthusiasm that surprised even him, collecting every scrap of information he could find about finders, wardens, and the boundaries between worlds. Most of it was useless, fantasies, misunderstandings, or deliberate misdirection. But occasionally, they found something that rang true, that matched what Ash had told them, or what Eliza had experienced firsthand. Listen to this, Theo said, looking up from a leather-bound book that smelled of dust and secrets. In the border regions of northern Europe during the 16th century, certain individuals known as Grenzgänger, literally border walkers, were sought out to locate and seal pathways between the mortal realm and the realms of the Fae and other spirits. These individuals were said to possess an inner compass that led them to places where the veil between worlds had grown thin. "That sounds familiar," Eliza said, setting aside the forum printout she'd been reading. "Anything about how they sealed these pathways?" Some vague references to rituals involving iron, salt, and certain words of power. Theo flipped through a few more pages. Nothing specific enough to be useful. They were pretty serious about not writing down the actual methods. "Smart," Eliza murmured. Since the incident at the bridge, she had developed a healthy respect for the power of information. What should be shared? What should be kept secret? She had spoken Ash's name by the river twice now, and both times he had appeared, offering careful answers to her questions. Never too much at once, never enough to satisfy her completely. It was clear he was testing her, gauging how much she could handle, how much she truly wanted to know. The pull had come again 3 days ago, a gentle tug toward the old train station on the edge of town. She and Theo had investigated and found a small tear between worlds hidden in an abandoned storage room. Nothing as dramatic as the door beneath the bridge, but still dangerous in its way. She had sealed it using a method Ash had taught her, involving a specific pattern of movement and intent. It had been easier than she expected, more natural. Like she had always known how to do it, but had simply forgotten. "What about the cold pulls?" Theo asked, interrupting her thoughts. "Have you felt any more of those specifically?" Eliza shook her head. "Not yet." Ash seemed to think they were rare, associated with major boundaries rather than minor tears. "Small mercies," Theo muttered. "I'd like to get better at this warden thing before we face any more collectors." A knock on the door made them both look up. Theo frowned. "Are you expecting anyone?" "No." Theo approached the door cautiously, one hand slipping into his pocket where Eliza knew he now kept a variety of protective charms. He peered through the peephole, then relaxed slightly. "It's a delivery guy." He opened the door to reveal a young man in a nondescript uniform, holding a small package. "Delivery for Eliza Morgan?" the man said, consulting his clipboard. "That's me," Eliza said, standing up. "But I didn't order anything." The delivery man shrugged. "Just delivering, ma'am. Sign here, please." After he left, Eliza examined the package. A small box wrapped in brown paper, with no return address. The only marking besides her name was a small symbol stamped in silver ink in one corner, a spiral with a dot at its center. "Ash," she murmured. "You think?" Theo asked, peering over her shoulder. "Could be a trap." One way to find out. Eliza carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a wooden box, about the size of her palm, intricately carved with patterns that reminded her of the tablet's symbols. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a compass. But not an ordinary compass. Instead of the traditional cardinal directions, the face was marked with symbols similar to those that had hovered above the tablet. And instead of a magnetic needle, this compass had a sliver of what looked like silver crystal, suspended in clear liquid. Beneath the compass was a small note written in elegant, flowing script. "For when the cold pull comes again, speak my name when you are ready to learn how to use it properly. Until then, trust your gift, finder. It will not lead you astray." Eliza picked up the compass carefully. The moment her fingers touched it, the crystal sliver rotated slowly, coming to rest pointing toward the window that overlooked the river, toward the bridge where the door had been. "Is it working?" Theo asked, watching with fascination. "Yes," Eliza replied softly. "It's working perfectly." She closed the box and set it on Theo's cluttered coffee table. There would be time to explore its mysteries later. Time to speak Ash's name by the river and learn what this new tool could do. Time to delve deeper into what it meant to be a finder in a world where the boundaries were thinning. For now, she was content with the knowledge that she was on the right path. The pull would come again, the gentle ones that led to minor tears, and eventually, the cold ones that signaled greater dangers. And when they did, she would be ready. Eliza Morgan had a gift for finding lost things. And now, finally, she had found her purpose. The end. "Is it working?" Theo asked, watching with fascination. "Yes," Eliza replied softly. "It's working perfectly." She closed the box and set it on Theo's cluttered coffee table. There would be time to explore its mysteries later. Time to speak Ash's name by the river and learn what this new tool could do. Time to delve deeper into what it meant to be a finder in a world where the boundaries were thinning. For now, she was content with the knowledge that she was on the right path. The pull would come again, the gentle ones that led to minor tears, and eventually, the cold ones that signaled greater dangers. And when they did, she would be ready. Eliza Morgan had a gift for finding lost things. And now, finally, she had found her purpose. The end.